Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us today. Our apologies for small little technical delay. Um, here today to talk about the latest research project here at AIA. And obviously, before we start, a big thank you to all of our sponsors who continue to support our research project. Without your financial contribution, it would not be possible for AIA to continue to invest and create these great research programs. Again, this is part of our consumer behavior and attitude series. And this is actually the third time we have conducted those series, really giving an insight to the industry about consumer behavior, what consumers are thinking about in terms of servicing and repair of a vehicle. So the first in the series this time is going to specifically focus on looking at the impact of COVID on consumer behavior related to servicing and repair of our vehicle. And we have a great guest today to help us unpack all of that great information. We're going to first have Rick, who's going to be talking about the actual research itself, and we'll then have James join us. So, Rick, thank you very much for joining us today.
I'm very excited to be here, JF, and thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this series. So, good afternoon and good morning, everyone, depending on what part of the country you're in. Rick Nadeau here from Quorus Consulting, been the lead researcher on this consumer behavior series since its inaugural installation back in 2016. The study itself, in fact, is a lot of data. We're just going to cover the tip of the iceberg here this morning. And it involves data coming from a survey conducted with 2,000 Canadian vehicle owners. Data fairly fresh off the press. The data was collected this June, so from June 8th to June 14th, 2021. And so really excited to be showing you some of the highlights from that data today.
Well, that's great. Thank you very much, Rick. So again, today what we're going to do is we're going to present, in three sections. So we have different pieces of the research that we're going to cover. We'll have Rick go over the data, the finding, and then we'll have James Channer join us and we try to give a perspective of what it looks like. So good morning, James, and thank you very much for joining us as well.
JF, thanks for having me. Rick, look forward to having this discussion with you. It's been just wonderful to have the AIA continue to support the industry as you guys have, and you got a great team behind you, JF. I'm James Channer from InMotion Brands, co-founder and COO, and we've been serving the automotive aftermarket industry for decades, and want to just continue to provide some of our insights and some of the things that we're seeing that really now have some data to kind of support our enthusiasm for the opportunity ahead. So thank you very much for having me.
You bet. And I love the idea of the word enthusiasm already. So this is great. So again, thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. So without further ado, let's move into the first section to cover, if we might. So I'll turn it over to you, Rick, to present the findings.
Perfect, JF. So we'll see if we can get the data up on the screen here. But the first theme that we'll be exploring here today is the impact of COVID-19 on vehicle use itself. There are a couple of kind of nuggets that we could pull from the data. So I'm sure it'll come as no mystery to anybody on the webinar today that the pandemic has had an impact on how much Canadians have been driving, how they have been using their vehicles. So we wanted to explore that as part of our study. So as you can see here, the layout on our slide, this will be a very standard layout for all of our data points here today in the webinar. The question we asked respondents on the left-hand side, the data point on the right-hand side. So the specific question we explored was, folks, when all is said and done, would you say that the number of kilometers you've put on your vehicle over the past year is higher because of the pandemic, lower, or about the same? And the data, again, probably coming as a bit of a no surprise to most in the session today, is that Canadians have been using their vehicle less often. So 61% of respondents told us that they believe that they've put fewer kilometers on their vehicle. It doesn't speak to how many kilometers specifically, but 6 out of 10 telling us they've driven their vehicle less than before. 31% telling us that it had no impact on them at all, and 8% believing that they've actually been using their vehicle or been putting more kilometers on their vehicle. Some of the reasons behind that, again, if you kind of look at your day-to-day behaviors yourselves, you probably kind of look at these results and go, yeah, this kind of makes sense. A lot of this rings true to your own family, or maybe some of those around you have been using their vehicles more or less. So we specifically explored with consumers what has been behind the drop in the kilometers and what has been behind the increase. The whole shopping discussion is at the top of the list. So 39% of Canadians, vehicle users, are telling us that they are using their vehicle less because, well, they can't go shopping. A lot of the shops were closed. There were lockdowns. And so they're basically doing more online shopping. 27% told us that, again, probably as not a huge shock to a lot of us, but 27% said, well, I don't have to drive into work. I'm not having to use my vehicle for that purpose. So these are the two main factors leading to a decrease in vehicle use. Two of the more common reasons why vehicle use has increased is, well, people are just basically taking public transportation less than they were before, or maybe not at all compared to before. 16% and 10% are telling us that, well, yeah, I'm not getting on a plane or a train or a bus anytime soon. So I'm going to be doing more of my long distance trips in my vehicle. How much of that is expected to stick post-pandemic? And now, again, here we have to take the numbers with a little bit of grain of salt, because nobody can foretell what the future holds. But when asked, are you going to continue with the online shopping and avoid shops? Well, we see that the number basically drops by that the drop in their kilometers will be sustained because of more online shopping. 15% will continue to work from home, and that will again continue to post-pandemic decreases in their kilometers driven. The use of public transportation is still going to happen as well, but again, we're talking about 10% of Canadians saying this, and then 7% will continue or hold true to their in-vehicle long-distance trips. So again, a lot happening during the pandemic. Again, this is kind of the tip of the iceberg. And now back to JF and to James to help us understand what this basically means for the aftermarket.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, interesting data points for sure. Thank you very much for all of these finding, Rick. So I'll turn it over to you, James. When you're looking at these numbers, what does that mean for the aftermarket? What does that mean to the people operating, repair shops, mechanical and collision centers? What does that mean for the people in the aftermarket, you think?
Our thoughts are that it's extremely bullish. We see tremendous market opportunity that has arisen from the pandemic. When we look at that particular stats of that 61% of vehicle owners have been driving less, you go across the country and speak to folks, and they're saying that in their facilities, they're near capacity. And so what's that going to mean when a large majority of that 61% get back on the roads, and they're going to need, and that's going to increase the demand that's already happening. Part of those reasons for the existing capacity that's already been experienced has to do with labor supply shortages and just some of the common challenges that every industry is seeing. But we view that as bullish, and it really speaks to those that are getting prepared now for that demand that's coming. They're in a great position.
Absolutely. Thank you. Glad to see some encouraging feedback and perspective from you, James. Reminder to everyone, it's on the Ubito platform. If you want to ask questions to Rick and James, don't hesitate to post those on the QA tab. We'll make sure to get to those. I know we already got some questions in advance. One question, and I guess I'll pose it to you first, Rick, is how are consumer motor oil purchase trends impacted by COVID? What future trends will impact the motor oil market? We're not covering it in that particular portion of the report, but some other indicators maybe down the road as we release other portion of that research, right?
That's right. I mean, it's a big question for sure. We do touch on motor vehicle purchases, online motor vehicle oil purchases in our next installment of the Consumer Behaviour series, the online shopping component, which I believe that report will be coming out either later this year or early next year. But I think at a more macro level, if I could venture a bit here, obviously, if we just look at the general use of vehicles and how those will be changing over the next 6 to 8 months, as the pandemic becomes, knock on wood, hopefully more under control, as we move into an endemic rather than a pandemic phase. People are going to be using their vehicles. We're already seeing it in those provinces where there's a little bit more easing of the public health measures happening. People are back in their vehicles, they're driving around, and that de facto will lead to a greater consumption of motor vehicle oil. What are your thoughts on that, James?
Yeah, no, again, I would agree. What we continue to see with respect to the ASPs, that those that are positioned themselves to really be ready for that increased demand that's coming in terms of kilometers driven, and again, you're going to be talking about the maintenance repair section of the report, but clearly we're seeing both the supply chain distributors are saying that businesses have been robust in the B2B market, and we're seeing it in the B2C. Now, keep in mind, this isn't equal across the board. Some ASPs are taking advantage of the opportunity by digitizing their business and really taking some of those best-in-class practices from other industries to make it easier to do business with them. And again, you'll be speaking to this in the report, and that's what we're also seeing too. So we're just looking forward to more of our businesses seize those opportunities that are ahead of them and get prepared for it.
All right.
Yeah, and
one more question. Go ahead, Richard. Yeah.
Sorry, JF. Our data was also showing that 1 out of 5 Canadians were not even going to service centers to get their vehicles serviced, right? So invariably, these vehicles are going to be coming back to the shops at one point or another, and they're going to be looking for, more likely than not, an oil change and the usual maintenance and repair.
Yeah. One more question. I think it goes in the same direction here, and to you, James. More people are now working from home and may have more disposable income that they would otherwise, would spend on various expenses, and therefore perhaps spending on vehicle maintenance. What's your take on that? Is more disposable income may mean a little bit more in that maintenance, and maybe tackling a bit of that underperform maintenance that we've always looked and observe in the marketplace? What do you think of that?
Yeah, exactly. Some of your studies over the years have continued to demonstrate how much untapped maintenance and repair has been in the marketplace, and so we do expect to see that shift. Again, not only with individuals at home with more disposable income, they've had more time, which again Rick speaks to in the report. And so again, we're completely bullish. We're seeing those that have been very progressive, that have modernized and digitized their business, those consumers that are now at home longer and have more leisure time and are spending more time online. Those that are more visible and more relevant online are taking advantage. And so, yeah, we've seen tremendous amount of success stories across the country and in the ASP marketplace that's been able to gain more of that market share.
Mm-hmm.
Great.
Anecdotally, JF. If I even go back to some of the research we did back for AIA back in 2014, when we did focus groups, consumers were telling us that they don't budget for maintenance and repair, which would be kind of interesting to see how it kind of manifests itself in kind of a pandemic context. People aren't by nature inclined to say, "Oh, I'm going to put a little bit of money aside for maintenance and repair." I don't. Maybe they just assume they'll deal with it when it comes up, or it's going to be a small bill if it happens. But there isn't kind of this inclination to say, "Oh, I'm saving all this money. I'm not taking X trip, or I'm not using the vehicle as much, so there's less gas, etc." But there just isn't that inclination to put coins aside.
I'm going to take one more question, and then we'll move on to the next sections and catch up in the general Q&A section. And thank you again for posting all these questions in the Q&A tab. James, you referred to the ASP positioning themselves. And what are those top things that an ASC an ASP should do or be doing to be in position? Maybe three things that comes to mind. What about being better positioned from the
Yeah,
perspective of the ASP?
Yeah, if we're talking positioning, now we've got to look at getting more business, right? And so let's relate it to how do I really seize this opportunity to get more business? And for those marketers out there, we all kind of know site, search, and social. And so site is your website, and so you first have to be relevant and visible online. People have to actually find you, and so there's a lot of ways to do some research and to find out how relevant you are online. And we've done hundreds of audits for shops across Canada, and we find there's very little visibility, unfortunately, in the aftermarket in terms of keywords that people are going to be punching in. Brakes near me, preventative maintenance near me. Most shops aren't being found when people are looking for those services unless they know the shop already. Social, you've got to be engaging. We're seeing, some ASPs do really well there in terms of engagement on that side, and then actual, the search. And as I was saying, those keywords are and those Google rankings are very important. And so I would say to any ASP out there, just ensure that you're taking the time to evaluate and to do some research on how you're showing up online. And there's a lot of subject matter expertise out there that you could tap into.
That's great. Thank you, James. So we're going to move along, and we're going to turn it over back to Rick to now present a second segment of the research. Back to you, Rick.
Perfect. Thank you, JF. So this segment now, folks, will focus on essentially maintenance and repair, what vehicle owners were doing during the pandemic, and what they how that's expected to look post-pandemic. So let's see our first slide here. So here again, trying to understand the impact of the pandemic on vehicle owners' ability to look after their vehicle, take care, do the maintenance and repair that they deem is necessary. So again, a very simple question posed to respondents since the beginning of the pandemic, just over 1 year ago. This survey was done in June, remember. Which of the following best describes your approach to your vehicle's maintenance and repair? And essentially what we're finding here is that for 2/3 of vehicle owners, they're telling us, well, there really wasn't much of an impact on their ability to look after their vehicle. But this was not the case for the remaining 34%, most of whom, in fact, were telling us that it posed a bit of a challenge for them. There were more challenges than enablers. So 21% saying it was more difficult to stay on top of their M&R, maintenance and repair. The remaining 13% saying it was easier to stay on top. So we kind of peeled away at those onions to kind of get a sense a little bit of, well, what were the things that were getting in the way, or what were some of the things that were making it easier for you to stay on top of your M&R? And so here what we have, this was a completely open-ended question. We let respondents type in their own answers to this particular question. Those who said it was easier for them to stay on top, we asked them, well, heck, what has made it easier for you? And again, here what we're seeing, we posted the top 5 answers up here on the screen. It's all about time. As James alluded to just a few moments ago, actually, it's about having more free time, more time to actually think about their maintenance and repair, more time at home to actually bring their vehicle in if it needed to be brought in. So that's what the top 2 answers here are basically focused on, all about time. And I'm sure you've all heard it before when the flip side of the coin is asked to vehicle owners, why don't you take more care of your vehicle? Why don't you take your vehicle in when it's supposed to be brought in? And invariably, the top answer there in all other research we've done is, well, I don't have the time. I don't have time to think about it. I don't have time to bring it in, etc. So again, not probably a huge surprise here, but nice to see some numbers put to this. The other facilitators, other things that made it easier for them is that, well, it's easy to stay on top of my M&R because, well, I'm just not using my vehicle as often as I used to. I'm doing less driving, so there's less maintenance to do. So it's easy for me to stay on top of that. And then 8% saying, when I did bring my vehicle into a service center, it was pretty straightforward. There were fewer customers there. It was a pandemic. People are staying at home. And so it was in and out like a dream. Those who, on the flip side, however, were telling us that it was more difficult for them to stay on top of their maintenance and repair, Here's what it was essentially the issue. And again, if you kind of looked around you, it probably come as no huge shock to hear vehicle owners tell us, well, shops are closed. In my province, there was a lockdown. There were more limited hours available for me to bring my vehicle in. The shops were only available or open during specific times of the day or days of the week. And so the difficulty and ability to make that appointment, the fact that shops were closed, and in certain circumstances, for sure, when consumers were bringing their vehicle to shops, they would see some pretty long lineups. Again, speculating here, but possibly because some of the bays, not all the bays, were open. There were limited times where you could bring your vehicle in. So those were by far the more important barriers. Then we get into things like financial situation, cost. Many Canadians were impacted financially, waylaid, furloughed, decreased hours with themselves or somebody else in the household, making it more difficult for them to afford the maintenance and repair that they may have deemed necessary for their vehicle. So those were the big findings there. Back to JF and James for their insights.
Very interesting data point. Thank you very much, Rick. So yeah, James, listening to those results, what comes to mind? What do you think that really means for the people in the business?
Yeah, for sure. Rick, can you just go back to your previous slide here when I make that comment? Is that possible?
Well, we'll see if the AV team can weave that magic.
Wonderful.
Is it more difficult? Is it that one or the easier one?
No, this is the one.
Okay.
Because as we were saying earlier, that across Canada right now, service bays are close and very near to capacity. Happening, and we expect that it's going to continue to happen. Yet here, we've already had your responders comment on how difficult it was around getting appointments, finding the access, booking issues. Shops were too busy. Shops are still busy. And we still got that 60% that we're talking about that aren't even yet back on the road. And so we see that as a tremendous opportunity for those that are preparing and planning for success. Meaning, be clear about the business that you're in. Be clear about the type of clients that you're looking to get after. Become more visible to folks that don't already know you today. This is a unique opportunity that we have if we get very smart and utilize the data that's available for us to really begin to plan for the growth that's coming ahead. We'll be in a great position rather than just taking on any business that's coming. Be very selective on the kinds of business that you want. And so, we see that continuing to happen with progressive facilities that are out there. And we're just encouraging more and more ASPs to use this window of opportunity to really seize the growth that's out in the marketplace, because consumers are already struggling and frustrated, as your survey demonstrated here.
Yeah, and the whole time issue is interesting too, as well, James?
Right.
It's those ASPs who can make smart decisions and smart booking plans around to make it easier for consumers to make the best of the time that they have available, which we know they're not all going to be working from home for the rest of their lives. Time constraints will be reintroduced into everyday lives, and so those ASPs that can be smart about making the most out of their patrons' times will be successful.
Absolutely. Time has always been a big currency for sure. JF, what's your thoughts?
Well, I actually have questions coming in. Question for James. You said, it's hard to get an appointment. Does that mean that some ASPs were not optimized to cater online? Do we think that the lack of capacity of consumer to connect with their ASPs might have been in some measure caused by not being well organized and structured to cater to a new audience that's really trying to get engaged online? What do you think?
JF, and to that questioner, yeah, I think you're bang on that. There's a lack of visibility that's already happening within the ASPs with respect to their online relevance, and so it's already difficult to find them. B, those websites, those sites lack enough digitization, and we like to say extending your showroom digitally. Well, what does that mean? If I can walk in and call you, make an appointment or pre-book something, why can't I do that online? If I have to go to the facility look at the tires, why doesn't the tires be digitally presented to me online? Make it easier for these individuals to begin their journey online with you. So then by the time they get contact with you, they've already started that process. And so, yes, we've seen that level of modernization, that level of digitization happen in other industries. And I'm really encouraged with what I'm seeing in ours. And I'm still hoping for many more to get on the boat for sure.
Great. We also got a couple of questions, and I guess I'll combine them. And they basically go in the same directions in looking at the issues of shortages, both in terms of access to replacement parts and fluids right now, obviously some dynamics around that, but also labor shortages. So what do we see as how are we going to be able to overcome these dynamics where parts are becoming harder to source, staff is hard to get by? Is that going, in fact, to have a limiting factor to what we expect to be some good indicators for the aftermarket?
Yeah, no, I would agree with that. There absolutely isn't any magic bullet that's out there, JF. You and I and everyone on this webinar knows, and so it would require each ASP to really be a strong leader to focus on what they do well. Plan and prepare accordingly. Ensure that your lines of communication are very strong with your jobbers and your supply chain. We've got world-class suppliers here in Canada. We need to be proactive in speaking to them and using some of the data and insights that they have to help us plan for our business for those upcoming seasons and for those upcoming quarters that are coming. And so I'd strongly recommend that you be proactive and have those communications. From the labor side, we're already starting to hear a significant impact of labor shortages. And so your recruitment and retention strategies need to be sound and clear. I personally heard great Herculean stories throughout the pandemic on how teams came together and how they built their cultures. So I'm very confident that the leaders within these ASPs have strong teams. And so now you've got to get that communicated to attract other employees that want to work in that type of culture. But at the same time, we've got to be thinking holistically about how we care for our employees from a health and wellness standpoint, and then training and development. And again, I would just continue to encourage ASPs to utilize the AIA, to utilize our community of suppliers and distributors completely in the supply chain to get the kind of training necessary to let your teams know that you want to invest in them to be able to perform at their best. And to that, I'm very hopeful what the future brings for our industry.
Right. And I'll ask the questions to Rick on this. And you mentioned earlier about consumer not necessarily focusing on budgeting for M&R. But if service and repair cost increases, do you think it could have an impact in terms of people wanted to or pursuing, maintenance and repair?
Well, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, when consumers look at the host of different expenses that they face, not to mention the increase in price of everything else around them. I mean, just yesterday, the governor of the Bank of Canada hinting at the impact on inflation. It's all around them. So when consumers are going, well, my utility bill is going up, my food bill is going up a lot, and my vehicle, well, maybe I can go another 6 months without doing what it probably needs to happen. They'll do it. It will become a lower priority for them. Obviously, if they need their vehicle to sustain their income, then they'll pay. They will do the bare minimum. And that I've heard that verbatim from consumers going all the way back to 2014. Right. So, James.
So essentially, be cautious of the fact that if we see due inflation in the cost of MR, it might have an impact on overall spend by consumer. Great. Mindful of time, we're going to move to our third segment because Rick has even more data to share with the group to close in on our first iteration of this consumer behavior. So, Rick, to you for the third segment.
Perfect. I could go on for hours, Jeff. Honestly, this is great. The next segment, folks, public health measures and their impact on ASPs. So in this particular segment, we explored, first of all, how satisfied vehicle owners who had in fact been to a dealership or to an ASP, how satisfied they were with the measures that were in fact in place. And so for those of you who are running ASPs out there and you're wondering, well, did we do a good job? Well, you can breathe a sigh of relief. So consumers were in fact satisfied. I mean, the scale, in fact, all we're showing here are those who are very, very satisfied or satisfied, but which occupies the large part of the scale. Very few were, in fact, dissatisfied. So to the tune of 83% and 87%, respectively, for those who went to an ASP or to a dealership, were satisfied with what was in place. And essentially, if you had the trifecta down pat, then you were probably doing a very good job in the minds of consumers. The trifecta being were you and your staff wearing masks? Was everything being sanitized? So was the sanitization station in there when consumers walked in? Were staff seen or known to be doing the sanitization within the vehicle, or the kind of those high touch points? And social distancing. So by and large, that's what consumers were looking for. And both ASPs and dealerships appeared to be doing that quite well. Moving towards the future, you might be wondering, well, what do I need to keep in place? What are consumers expecting us as service centers to keep in place from a public health measure perspective? And will they be quite happy to see go by the wayside? And so we explored probably about eight or nine public health measures, specific ones. And the ones that were most likely to come up as the ones that they want to see kept in place are the sanitization station in the service area. They want to make sure that their service center is going to continue sanitizing their vehicle before they come in and pick it up. And they're quite keen on this whole online booking. So again, kind of feed off that use of technology, leveraging of technology. And I'm sure James will have a few words to say about that, the importance of technology moving forward. Some of the things that consumers were quite happy to see disappear were the restrictions around the seating area. They would like to make specific appointments for specific times of the day, rather than just dropping the vehicle off in the morning and coming back at the end of the day to pick up their vehicle. And they're more or less indifferent regarding the plexiglass barrier, but this was in fact at 34% one of the public health measures that they was most likely people would be quite happy to see disappear. But again, not forgetting that another third there, if you have the report underhand, would still want that to be in place. But anyhow, back to JF and James for your thoughts.
Thank you. Very pleased to see, that really the industry stepped up to the plate as an essential service and really delivered those services, being, independent ASPs or the dealership, and then get a high level of, good response back. I think is a good, testament to the quality of the response that we provide as an industry during COVID. So James, looking at those numbers again, some commentary as to what that tells you for the future.
Yeah, pretty clear. As consumers as well, we would all expect that any retail service provider would provide a safe and secure environment for us to do business in. So that makes a whole lot of sense. And I would fully expect ASPs will continue to do that. That convenient factor, however, is again demonstrated in these vehicle owners commenting. And so we've really got to be picking up on what they're saying here. They're talking about convenience. They're looking for an ease of doing business because all of our lives have been stressed and strained during the pandemic. So if we want to create these unique competitive advantages, the easier we make it to do business, the more convenient we're making it to do business with consumers, they'll want to do more business with us. So we've absolutely got to get visible and relevant online. We've got to make doing business with us easier by leveraging technology, modernizing our operations, and then we've clearly got to take care of our staff and continue to lead well. And I think if we do all those things, we'll be prepared for the demand that's not only here already, but also for what's coming.
If I could add something to that, Jeff, the pandemic has changed expectations that consumers have had around their interactions with retailers and service centers and so on. I mean, if you just think of the basic grocery shopping experience, I can go to my local Walmart. I put my order in. I can go curbside pickup. I show up within 10 minutes. The order is in my trunk. I drive off. It's complete convenience and the maximizing the use of the consumer's time. The age old challenge of going to your doctor's office, you have to book the time off. You go in, you sit in the waiting area for probably a very long time. You then go into the actual office, wait for a long time. You then have to go back into your vehicle and drive back home. Now, for the past month and a half, it's been my doctor calls me. It's a 10-minute conversation. And that's unfortunately, well, that's where the bar's been set, right? These are the kinds of expectations that have been changed. It's going to transform the healthcare service, the way healthcare is delivered. Is probably going to have an impact on expectations with respect to maintenance and repair as well.
Mm-hmm. Let me just jump in there, JF, and just want to just reiterate this one point. I don't want to minimize the level of complexity and the level of investment in technology and equipment and training and certification that ASPs in our industry has done. It's remarkable on the level of investment that we have made, right, to service vehicles that have more technology than a space shuttle, right? So that's the business that we're in. What we now need to continue to invest in is improve the customer experience, improve that level of communication. Let's utilize technology, things like digital vehicle inspections. Let's make it easy to help these consumers understand. Like Rick was saying earlier, help them put together a budget on how to manage the expenses of maintenance and repair so they can protect that $50,000 investment to ensure that vehicle reaches its engineered life. Because Canadians as a whole, financially, when you look at the data, right, we are struggling financially as a whole, right? Like we're carrying a lot of debt as a society. And so if we as an industry can really help our consumers manage that expense effectively, we'll have long-term loyal clients. And I'm very encouraged in what I'm seeing in the marketplace. And I think there's just great opportunity more for us to employ some of those best practices.
Great insights. Lots of questions that keep coming in. Parsing through those questions. One for you, Rick. And the question is further to what we discussed earlier. Any way to measure the consumer's reactions to inflationary price adjustments in parts and labor? What's a tolerance? How can we get a sense of what level of tolerance will the consumer have in relations to these prices going up as a result of labor parts, but we'll also talk about what's the cost of maintaining all of the health measures and measure that we've put in place. So, any way to measure that?
Oh, well, I'm sure there are measures in place. So it's not something that's easily measured through traditional kind of public opinion research. I mean, there's probably going to be some openness to some degree of inflation around low ticket activities. An oil change, going from 60 to $70 probably isn't going to break anyone's back or blow anyone's budget. But I think as you move into bigger ticket items, it'll be a much bigger consideration for your average consumer. All right, for all the reasons that we explained earlier around all their other priorities to which they need to be putting their income.
Right. And to you, James, we talked about all of these post-pandemic measures, investing obviously in systems, technologies, increasing the level of convenience. This obviously comes as a cost that ultimately will be passed on to consumer. That will make the price go up, I guess. And that's a question from the audience. How do we reconcile that?
Yeah, I think it's just really supported in what the data is telling us. What the data is telling us is that demand is increasing. And so if there's a certain type of clientele that you don't want to do business with, possibly someone that that price is really their number one issue, you will have other options because many consumers are going to seek service providers that provide a great experience, a high level of service, a high level of engagement, and an ease of doing business where price is not going to be the highest factor to their decision to do business with you. And so again, every ASP will just have to evaluate where do they want to be in the marketplace. And if you're providing a level of value, I love the phrase, price becomes an issue, when there isn't any value concerned. And so, if there's a lot of value being received, that there is some price elasticity, right? So, I think that every ASP will have to evaluate that within their own business, but certainly lean on the communities that you're a part of, and seek some guidance on what makes the best sense for you.
And that's been a traditional challenge for ASPs, JF, right? Because the consumer expectations is that compared to a dealership, I'm going to ASPs because, well, it costs less in the minds of many consumers, right? There's an expectation there, so that dynamic is a difficult one, and as much as one that I completely agree with James. It's in the minds of consumers, that's an easier thing to say than do.
Mm-hmm. Right. In particular to cost inflation and pressure, many of our members are obviously involved in the collision industry, which heavily relies on the support of the insurance industry. So this is a bit of a different dynamic, and the question is, how is it going to play out as we see these inflations on, according to goods, labor costs, the complexity of servicing customers post-pandemic, where in fact the true customer here is an insurance company who probably is going to resist inflationary pressure on paying more for those repairs. How do you see that's playing out in the coming post-pandemic months?
Yeah, I think it's going to be a continued challenge because when we look at the collision industry as a whole, not only we've seen a large shift in terms of mergers and acquisitions that have happened, and so there's larger groups that are continuing to operate. Makes a lot of sense. There's economies of scale. There are negotiations with insurance providers, and grabbing that referral work is increasing. Plus, there's that tremendous advantage of having that infrastructure of support. We see networks and franchise systems within the collision industry continue to rise. And so if you're an independent, you're going to have some other pressures that I would recommend that you continue to build your own network within, again, your service providers and who's supporting you to ensure that you're operating with as much excellence as possible to drive as much cost efficiencies into your business as you can. The networks have already taken advantage of their breadth and scale to be able to put them in a position to be able to protect and support their independent collision centers in a fairly dynamic way. Again, at the end of the day, we're still talking about some fundamental business drivers in terms of best practices that can drive some efficiencies, but still unsure, at least from my viewpoint, on how those pressures are going to impact the collision industry as a whole.
Yeah. Would you say, James, that's going to also play true to the mechanical side of the business as well, where the need to be more effective might lead, in fact, to an increased consolidation? More people joining networks. You think as a result as well?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's very wise for every independent operator to take a look at their business from the outside in. And, I know of many performance groups that have done well to provide some of those resources. There's associations that are providing some of those resources. There's banners and networks that provide some of those resources. Again, those decisions are up to an individual. How much of your independence are you willing to give up to kind of assimilate and consolidate some of your practices to be part of a network or a brand? At the end of the day, because of the opportunity that's presented, I think if you're very clear about the kind of business that you're in, you can go get more of that type of business. You just got to, do the research and if you need some help, find the help and then go get more of that business that you're looking for because it's out there.
Yeah. Shifting gears a bit, we really talked about the importance to be effective in your digital strategy, being able to provide effective experience online for consumers. Um, the question that came is how can businesses optimize their digital footprint to capture the new online demand? Any piece of advice, James?
Well, yeah, the first place that I'd say that you've got to start, no different than what we've seen explode in the last decade and plus in terms of operational efficiencies, right? We moved from a very traditional, hey, I might have some kind of payment system and invoicing system, but I wasn't really tracking my operation. Now there's shop management systems, collision side and on the mechanical repair side in our industry that are helping these business owners make better decisions by tracking the data and analyzing the data. All of that's available digitally online. For example, every website you can turn on Google Analytics. Google Analytics will tell you where your traffic's coming from, what those people are doing on your site. And I'd like to hazard a guess that the majority of shop owners either don't have Google Analytics set up, because we've done a lot of audits of shop owners and they don't have it set up, or they have it set up and they don't understand it. And so who's ever providing you web service and website management, I would go to them immediately and say, hey, is Google Analytics set up on my website? And if it's not, can you set it up? And I want to start looking at what's happening in terms of my site. And then that's a great place to start.
That's great. I'm just looking again to, we got, again, great engagement with the people on the Ublo platform and some very
Wonderful.
positive feedback towards you, Rick and James. So thank you again for your input. Rick, one quick question. As the global supply chain bottlenecked and container shortage continues to surge prices on parts and tires from overseas, we are likely to see more consumers turning back towards North American made products. How can we, maybe in future, is that something we could look in some of our research with consumers? Do you think it's something we're able to observe and measure in terms of the change and mindsets around, where those product comes from and whether they source them from?
We're already ahead of you, JF. In the next iteration, actually, one of the things that we look at in terms of online shopping, in particular, I don't know about whether we have not explored specifically, when they go to their ASP, if consumers are asking, where are my parts coming from? But on the online side, we do explore where the part is coming from. So is it coming from a location in Canada? And second of all, we also explore the importance of whether the part is in fact manufactured domestically. So that is something that we will be looking in the next Consumer Behavior Series report.
This is great. Thank you. Well, I think we have come to the close of the hours. I'm going to first take the opportunity to thank you, Rick, James, for sharing great data, great insights to our participant today. This was very much a great learning experience, I think, for everyone. And thanks everyone online who's providing great questions as well to the group. I would like to also, before we let everybody go, take the opportunity again to thank our sponsors, the people that are making this possible for all of us here within the automotive aftermarket. So thank you again for these companies' commitment to continued research for the industry. Please reminded that we're going to be sharing a survey of how you've liked today's session. So stay posted in your inbox for that. The recording of today's presentations will be made available online, so it is possible for you to come back or share that recording with others. And we're obviously looking to your feedback. So at this point, I'd like to thank you all for joining today. Looking forward to have you join our next webinar series. And until then, take care.